It's exciting to see Face It with Cindy Mack come to life and now available internationally. So please welcome your connection coach, Cindy Mack.
In the beginning of my leadership journey years ago, I knew that I wanted to lead in a way that I did not see in my industry. Relationships and authentic connection is at the heart of everything that I do, and I wanted to customize more and cookie cutter less. And so, and I was gone in this part where I was really growing and starting to see things happen. And I wanted to come up with a name or a way to describe the direction that I wanted to take my team. And so, you all know that my nickname is Cindy Mack. And so Mac became making, it started off as making a connection, but it turned into making authentic connections. And it just, I really believe that God just dropped that into my heart. It was just perfect. Now, I'm sharing this with you because I want you to know that back then I was not great at connecting all the time. I mean, when I did connect, it was great, but I faced conflict just like any other person, and I encountered challenging people, and I definitely did not handle every situation well. I'm sure some of you have stories, and I still don't always get it right. The difference now is the growth that I've had really specifically in the last 5 years of implementing certain tools and techniques that just really minimize the downside, minimize the amount of times I get it wrong, and really also allows me to be able to see things differently so that I can uh, be able to get it right and make it right if I do mess up. So there were always, and a specific thing, I think not only for me, but what I see a lot is there were certain personality types that I consistently butt heads with. I took things personally a lot, and I got defensive when I was faced with challenges and opposition. Not to mention my personal life at that time. I had a strained relationship with my sister and niece. I had two failed marriages, and I'm not sure that you would really call any of this great connecting. But it tore me apart inside. I loved these people, and I couldn't seem to connect with them in a way that they understood me and that they felt I cared. So it became a lifelong journey and commitment for me to master the art of connecting authentically for greater impact and influence. And, it's really hard as a connector to admit those things that early on I got it wrong. And it really bothered me. And I'm sure that many of you can say, yeah, in my early years, we make those mistakes. And especially if relationship is important to you, it really bothers you and it stagnates your growth. And so that was, not only was I frustrated personally in my personal life, but I was also frustrated because I really wanted to make a difference. And so that's one of the things that I loved about the growth journey in the last 30 years of my career. But what has driven me to go far outside of my comfort zone to start Face It, because I really believe we've got to face this, which is people, in order for us to really be able to make a difference. So I'm going to give you 3 points and areas that I feel like are good nuggets for you, that I feel like were really good tools and learning points for me. There's not a whole lot of the how to, because that obviously takes a lot more time. And I want to respect your time in this introductory launch. But I am going to make those 3 points, and then I'll close it out with a story at the end. But okay, so point number one is it starts with you, but it's not about you. It starts with you and you're like, yes, I want to figure myself out. I want to grow. I want to know my strengths. And we really can get into those things that when it's about us. So it starts with you, but really ultimately it's not about you. Connecting is about the other person. Our natural human desire is to be seen and appreciated. In other words, respected. I don't know about you, and all of you are really, I know many people who are watching this and would watch it are leaders. And so I want to be respected. But this is why we've got to get to know ourselves first before anyone else can get you and respect you. Because our knee-jerk response is to get offended when someone misunderstands us, get dismissive if someone doesn't see what we see, and defensive when someone hits us in where our weakness is. If you don't really know yourself, those are those knee-jerk reactions. You're not going to get the respect that you want when we have those responses. And it really starts with knowing yourself. So an example I have is I have this client who's a visionary. She has a lot of businesses and she's a driver. And she can do a lot of different things well, except people. When you get to know her, you can see that she's generous and she's caring, but in the public eye, she comes across as greedy and arrogant. Ouch. And you probably know dominant people like that in your world that can come across that way if they just aren't, one, aware of themselves, or have very good people skills. So she's having a hard time connecting with the community and finding the right help. And so here's someone whose strength is vision and business, but systems and communication is lacking. So in some ways, you'd say she's successful because, she's got a lot of businesses and is really, making a lot of money. But she's actually stuck and spinning her wheels because none of them are really thriving. Why? Well, first off, there's low self-awareness. And how I got to that is just from interaction, watching her in business in certain scenarios, and then really just realizing and hearing a lot of the different feedback. It's that the frustration is always someone else. It's, they don't get it. They don't see it. And I told them this and they didn't do it right. And in not taking the responsibility of the fact that you're not detailed. And really, honestly, being a visionary, the strength, not many people have it. It's a strength. And it scares most people. We think that our strengths, that they're normal. We think that our talents are normal. They're not. They're unique to you. And a lot of times when you're dealing with people, they don't have those same strengths. And so, especially when you're a visionary or a strong leader, it scares some people. And so, because she's a driver and a visionary, she should not be in charge of staff or training. She should be leading leaders. And then having those people be able to run those areas that she's not good at. Next, she's a risk taker, but guarded. So she needs someone to track and organize the details so that the risks balance the caution. So you're not always questioning or backtracking. And so those are just like a couple of things, that self-awareness and bringing someone in to say, hey, this is you and this is great. But here are some things why you're spinning your wheels. Can any of you relate to this? Right? I mean, we can relate because we've each had those things that we're like, why am I not getting further? I know I can do this. So the frustration, nothing frustrates a visionary more than the vision not being met. So there's where the frustration lies. So when you discover your strengths and your fears and your needs, okay, it's not just your strengths, but your fears and your needs. Then you can regulate your behavior better and communicate more openly. You know exactly where you stop and they start. It doesn't mean that you won't have conflict or misunderstanding, but at least you will recognize where the disconnect is happening. So you can kind of hear it in the scenario I just described, where they stop and that next person starts. So it starts with you, but it's not about you because we need each other. So once you do, so it doesn't mean that the conflict and the frustrations aren't going to happen, but you will start to recognize where the disconnect is happening. And then what fuels you and what shuts you down. You know how to look for people who you can be real with and who can fill the gaps, and you'll appreciate them more. So that self-awareness, I've said before, self-awareness isn't just about you getting better. Self-awareness is so that we can actually serve better, because then you show up knowing what your needs are. Like, there are certain things I know I need my time alone. I love people and I want to be around people, but I have got to have that downtime. And so I'm not going to set myself up to fail. and be with a group when I know I'm done. And so that those are those self-awareness things that keep you from making some of those bad snap reactions. Okay, point number two, self-deception. This is where we don't see ourselves in an accurate light. People don't care. We know, like the phrase, people don't care how much you know until they know. Not only, well, they don't care how much you know, and they don't care who you are, what your title is, until they know how much you care. There's nothing more common, and reading this in, I don't know if any of you have read the book Leadership and Self-Deception, but it's an excellent read. And there's nothing more common in organizations than self-deception. This is what the Arbinger Institute wrote the book, and this is what they say. And I bring this up to you even as an individual. So even if you're not leading an organization, as an individual, because we're running households, we're in our community. And so I bring this up to you even as an individual, because remember, it starts with you, but it's not about you. And how do you handle yourself in situations that can point to what's holding you back? So if you've got goals personally, sometimes self-deception is what's holding you back to reach those goals, even if you're not part of an organization. So according to the Arbinger Institute, no matter what we're doing on the outside, people respond. This is so good. I want you to like really get this. Okay. No matter what we're doing on the outside, people respond primarily to how we're feeling about them on the inside. And how we're feeling about them depends on whether we're in or out of the box concerning them. So, okay, I'm going to tell you this story. It came to me today when, I was like, oh my gosh, one of the early times of my growth period, I was getting ready to go home. I was living in Jersey, my family's in Florida, and I was getting ready to go home for the holidays. And I was like, my family never calls me when I'm here. Like they never reach out. They never find out how I'm doing. And they never want to do anything. And I was just complaining about my family and how they don't take me seriously. And I feel like they dismiss me or they make fun of me and blah, blah, blah. And the person said to me, who knew me very well, and I'm in this growth time. So I'm like, I'm new and different. Don't you see me different? And they didn't, because, change, when you make the change, it's still, people have to catch up. And so they really didn't believe this new me. So this person said to me, well, when you go home, what do you do to show them you love them, care about them, and want to be around them? And, what do you do? Before they even said that, they said, what do you do when you go? And I'm like, well, I usually will meet up with friends and I want to do something. They just like to sit around. So I'll go, do stuff. And they're like, well, what if you just did what they wanted to do? And it was just the whole thing of my perception of my relationship with my family was about me. Instead of looking at it and saying, they were feeling like I didn't want to be with them, that they weren't a priority. And I'm feeling like, I love you, and why don't you love me? So do you see where the disconnect is when you're in the box? So many times we look at people like this was a really actually probably even a more relatable story is, when you're in the airplane, how Southwest, you can pick your own seat, right? So you get on, you pick your seat, and of course you're like, yes, I got an aisle seat or a window, whatever you are, right? So you're great, but then you put your bag down in that middle seat because and it's just subtle. You just put a little stuff. You look like you got a lot of stuff. You're very undesirable to sit next to. So you got your stuff there and you're sitting there and you're just like not looking, but you're kind of looking. And so you're being very particular of who you might look at to say that the seat's available or not at all. And that right there says, I don't see them as people. I don't see them. I see that I and my needs are more important. And even though that's a scenario that seems not a big deal, it's an example and a really good example of how a lot of times self-deception is more about us not really seeing the other person as a person. So, and that can ripple effect all the way around. So most of the people that I work with come because of a situational problem, but most of the time that situation is a result of an underlying problem. We look at a situation, we get so fixated on like, she said this and they did this, when really there's an underlying problem. And that is in the box of self-deception instead of outside the box where you see the whole picture and the other people as people. So and this is like such a huge topic, and I love the way they wrote the book because it is kind of like a parable or a parody, like it's a story. So it's in a setting of an actual story. And so looking at self-deception, oftentimes we see people and we look at people through our lens and our perspective. And that's going to take me to the last point, which is people need people. That getting to know ourselves is important because we want to serve others, and really doing big things and meeting goals always involves other people, whether it's in your family or a team or in a community. We need each other. And it's this last point is more about why we should all take the time for self-discovery. Because we need each other, the more we understand ourselves, the more we can show up and see what they need and who they are, and maybe even put ourselves in their shoes. Misunderstandings happen all the time because misconceptions of the person that you're talking to, because they're wired differently. When there's frustration with another person or lack of understanding, 90% of the time it's a perception gap. You're not going to want to be friends with everyone, but why not try your best to avoid conflict? And because you'll meet people where you're like, that's not my person. But if you have to work with them, then we've got to find a way to do that. I have another story. So I have these two managers, and we're going to name them Gretchen and Donna for the protection of their privacy. But anyway, so these two managers, Gretchen was a rule follower. She was a black and white kind of person, extremely loyal and observant, guarded and skeptical. A caregiver at heart, though. Can you like picture someone in your life that's like that? Can be a little negative, but just really like on top of things. Donna was very dominant and independent and competitive. You can probably see where I'm going here. Okay. But they had no clue why they couldn't get along. Gretchen would come to me often with complaints that Donna wouldn't help some of the consultants that weren't on her direct team, and she just knew she was using some of the things at the office that weren't hers. Donna thought Gretchen was negative and grumpy. And she was like, I don't understand why I can't please her. She just didn't understand where the problem was. Neither one could see the other one's needs. Yes, needs. See, it wasn't really about the actual situation or the conflicts that they would come up with, because they were always kind of the same, you know? It was the lack of connection. They had different needs and a different approach to life. Therefore, their perceptions of each other was wrong. Why did it bother Gretchen? What could Donna do? Why did Donna act that way? And how could Gretchen give more grace? I needed both of them in my organization, both very different from me, and they needed each other. So think of someone in your life that you just don't connect with. They frustrate you, or vice versa, you frustrate them and you just don't understand why. You can ask yourself, well, describe them? And a lot of times when you describe them, you start to see, Gretchen needed rules and security. And things needed to be equal. And so Donna, they both, but Donna was independent. And so if they both kind of saw those good qualities or at least needs, they could probably have found common ground to at least converse in a very healthy way. So it's just as these are just some snapshots of the tools and concepts that I use in coaching because a high value for me is for people to get along and for people to be able to see the good in each other. I do have a fault that I know is anytime someone starts to complain about something, I always want to flip it to the good. I always want to flip it to, and sometimes people need to be heard and they need to be, it needs to be okay for them to vent or let it out and talk through it. But I also do believe that in the end, if we want to be successful or we want to show up as our best selves, then self-discovery, ultimately, you guys, the more that I got to know me, the better I was with other people. And the more I could see and value those qualities in them. And I could be outside of the box because in the book with self-deception, you're in a box where you just see you and your perception. When you get outside the box, you start to see people as people. And man, what we can do when we come together.